All right, so good morning, class. Today, Darby Ball is going to present his book review for the book that he chose to read for this class, Senior Science and Faith. And Darby comes to us from Longview, Texas. Yes, native to this town, right? He's been here for all 4 of his college years. 3. Oh, okay. Just did it in 3. There he goes. So, there he goes. So, let's give Darby our attention and show him some love. Yes. Pray that he does well here.
Thank you for that support and encouragement, Dr. DeVore. As it's just stated, I'm Darby Ball, and today I'll be talking about the Galileo connection, which I have in my backpack. I didn't think to bring it up here to show you guys, but you know what the title is, so it doesn't really matter. The Galileo connection, the subtitle is Resolving Conflicts Between Science and the Bible by Charles Hummel. As the title implies, Hummel investigates some of the historical conflicts between science and Christianity in Western thought. He wrote this book as a constructive foundation rather than a complete solution or structure. Hummel states that his 2 goals are whetting the appetite of readers of a general audience with little or no scientific background, and to provide an up-to-date introduction to the history and philosophy of science and its relationship to a biblical perspective on the natural world. The book opens up with a painful and unfortunate narrative of Galileo's trial under the Roman Catholic Church regarding the publication of his dialogue on the 2 principal world systems. Galileo used the literary form of 2 characters debating back and forth over a wide range of astronomy topics, with particular focus on the debate between an Earth-centered Aristotelian model and a Sun-centered Copernican model. In this manner, an author could discuss controversial or even heretical doctrines without being held responsible for teaching it himself. The book was also written in Italian rather than in Latin, so it had widespread appeal. While the book was an immediate literary success, enemies of Galileo and the Church convinced the Pope that the book mocked the Pope and taught heretical doctrine as fact, which the committee that examined the book later reported. Despite Galileo's fading health, he was ordered to come to Rome to be held on trial. Despite expectations that the trial would fade into obscurity, Galileo's insistence that his book defended the Earth-centered model contradicted the tone and arguments that the book presented, causing his trial to be escalated to the higher authorities. He was finally ordered to recant any belief in a Copernican model. His book was banned by public edict, and Galileo was held under house arrest for the remaining 8 years of his life. Over the centuries, Galileo's tragic condemnation by the Catholic Church has loomed large in controversies between science and religion. Galileo's struggle with the Church has often been cited as evidence to support the claim that the relationship between science and Church is one of inevitable hostility. Hummel writes in part to show that this is not the case, and that Galileo's unfortunate, case was an exception rather than the norm. In the first section of his book, Hummel explores the lives and backgrounds of 4 leaders in the scientific revolution, which are Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, and Newton. All of these renowned scientists were also committed Christians who viewed their investigations of nature as a sacred duty and privilege. But I'm not going to go into each of those because they're its own little story. The second section of the book focuses on biblical interpretation. Hummel writes on the teaching of the 2 books of God, his Word and his works. Hummel discusses specifics of biblical interpretation and application, focusing on biblical language concerning nature, which is in understanding cultural usage, popular language, and non-theoretical terminology. Hummel argues that we should not try to prove that the Bible can be interpreted to teach scientific models, lest it be discarded along with these models as science advances. Instead, Hummel focuses on the Bible's primary concern in the arena of human history, within which God reveals himself and his purposes. Hummel then at length discusses miracles and their relationship to science, and then investigates Genesis 1, interpreting it regarding its historical context, literary genre, and textual context. He then discusses controversy over the interpretation of the term day throughout the account, and then concludes by discussing the significance of Genesis 1 as it relates to ancient Israel, to biblical theology, scientific enterprise, and the contemporary church. The third and final section of the book discusses conflict and reconciliation. First, Hummel discusses Darwin and the impact of evolution and responses among Christians. Hummel then describes, how do you say that? Baconianism? It's from Francis Bacon. Baconism, his ideology. It is a form of scientific explanation that knowledge only arises from the accumulation of perceived facts obtained directly by objective observers and rejects any hypotheses that cannot be confirmed by direct observation. Hummel states that the opposition of many evangelical Christians to the theory of evolution seems to reflect a strong commitment to Baconianism. Baconianism, there we go. Hummel then elaborates on the creation science controversy, first defining creation and evolution with distinct separation from evolutionism, the philosophy that organisms inherently improve themselves through progressive change and increasing complexity, including cultural and social evolution. Hummel discusses three origins of note: the origin of the universe, of life, and of humanity itself. Finally, Hummel's last chapter focuses on how scientific and biblical views of nature can be related. The two prominent models he discusses are the two-realm model and the concordist model. The two-realm model tries to divide theology and science as two radically different spheres, but this model fails to do justice to biblical revelation and its teaching on the natural world, leading to a God of the gaps ideology. The concordist model attempts to harmonize between biblical and scientific explanations, as if pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. However, under this model, as science changes, so too must the biblical pieces be reshaped to fit it. Hummel then discusses a partial view model, in which biblical and scientific descriptions are different kinds of maps for the same terrain. Hummel closes his book with a discussion of Pascal, who integrated his biblical and scientific views, who serves as an example for us as Christian scientists. The question becomes, what do we take away from this book? One main point, of course, is that science and Christian faith are not mutually exclusive, and do not inevitably result in destructive conflict. While this book didn't particularly discuss ideas like vocation, I think it does still align with Letourneau's vision of integration of faith and work, with an integrated view of science and faith. I had the pleasure a couple of years ago of doing an interview with Nick Schultz, who works at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention out in Georgia. And he talked to me a lot about his work environment, and he talked about how it's very impersonal, how you're looked down upon for having a discussion of faith. But I think it's very important, as this book reinforces, to remember that when we're out there in our professions, that science and Christianity are not fundamentally opposed. And it's a very important message for us to bring that to our field. Thank you.
Oh, right.
So what were the three models of relationship? You had the two-realm, the concordist, and a partial something?
Yes. Partial, do you want to explain the partial view one?
Yeah, what was that?
Well, he didn't go into too much detail about that, surprisingly. I thought he would for something that he proposed, but he describes it as having like different maps for, like different kinds of maps for the same terrain.
Okay. So, like rock ages versus the age of rocks kind of thing?
I guess so. I mean, I hadn't heard that, but...
Okay. So two realms is kind of like neither says anything
Yeah.
about the other, yes?
Yes.
Concordist is they're supposed to say the same thing, but sometimes that gets troublesome.
Yes.
You don't seem to say the same thing. And so you have a partial one there at the end. Is that the one he proposes?
Well, he presented it separately from his two most prominent models, he says.
Okay.
But, I don't know, it's hard to say. He didn't really offer much of a... He listed problems with the first two models, and then, I guess, stated a third model that could work, but didn't really give much support for it, which I found kind of surprising.
All right, other people's questions for our speaker today?
Question. What did you get out of it?
Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, obviously the whole thing's focused on aligning science and faith and showing that they're not in conflict. I guess I hadn't really considered that, before reading this, I had never considered that Galileo was like the exception as opposed to what science had rejected. One thing that the book made clear throughout it was that science, as we know it in the Western world, developed in a predominantly Christian culture. And that wasn't really something I had thought about. That, in most regards, the church has been a great contributor to science. When you hear names like Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, and Newton, you think first of their science and not necessarily of their Christian faith. But that's definitely something that the book brings to mind.
Right, and what was the title of the book again?
The Galileo Connection.
Galileo Connection. All right, any other questions for our speaker today? All right, well, let's give him. Thank you, Mr. Ball.